What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Like-Minded Creators Podcast. My name is Chris Hamill, an audio engineer of 15 years experience working with both in-studio and live sound. Joining me are my tag team partners, Greg Telfayon, a phenomenal drummer of... How many years have you been playing?
Probably like 30 years now.
30 years experience, yeah. And a good buddy of mine, Zaki, who literally plays every instrument under the rainbow and has worked with hundreds of bands and has been in hundreds of other bands. So I think we have a perfect episode topic for you today, which is studio prep and how important it actually is. Because a lot of bands, guys, think that they're ready to go into a studio. They think their songs are ready to go. They think their instruments are ready to go, and they get into the studio, you hit record, and it comes out like muffled garbage. So yeah. I think we have a lot of things to talk about with this as far as how important it is to get yourself mentally, your band songwriting, and your instruments ready. I think those are the three pillars right there to make sure your band gets ready for the studio. So guys, let's hit it off. What's like one of the first important things that a band should look for as far as getting ready to record in the studio?
Well, I mean, from an artist, Zach's going to approach it from both sides because he's an engineer as well, and he's a musician, so he knows both angles of it, so it's going to really be interesting. But from a musician's standpoint, depending on who's writing the songs, I'm going to use myself as an example. I'm a multi-instrumentalist. I write a lot of the music that I play, but the other people in the band I'll dictate what they're going to do based on what the drum beat is, let's just say, and where everything kind of matches up. You can do your own thing, but that's the way we write. So to get the songs down, you want to make sure the other person that's playing, that you're conveying the idea to, you need to know that they understand the part, they've digested it. Inherently, like, they should be able to do that because they're playing music with you in the first place. So that should be a really important aspect of playing, being able to listen to what your other bandmates showing you so you can learn it. Just know the parts so well where you couldn't not play it right. That's where you need to be before you're going in the studio. And if you don't know your songs and you haven't played them all the way through, on each person in the band, if they don't know their parts and they think they know their parts and the other person's not even calling, like, I'm a drummer and I see that you're the bass player and your parts aren't really solid, and we're going into the studio, I'm gonna say something, which is my place, and the guitar player and everybody should agree that needs to get better. So you got to know the songs because you're going in there to spend money that you may not have in the first place, and it's a big deal. Let's say it's thousands of dollars to do. This is not something you could just do it yourself. But there's a learning curve there, and that's a whole different conversation. But you're going in the studio at this situation, and you want to be prepared, and you want to know what the song is, how, the metronome as a drummer. You got to know the BPMs before you go, and he's going to ask you what it is. So you're going to have to know that before you even start tracking. If you don't know that, that's going to set a really bad tone that's going to be time wasted. Then you got to figure it out. So just be prepared. Again, going back to the last conversation that we had. Just be prepared because that money's going to go very quickly if you're not. So, practice with a metronome to the actual songs so you could play the BPM when he puts that on and be tight and have everybody else line up for like the scratch track. Those two things are going to be the first thing you go on. So the guitar player and the drummer need to know their parts the most, and then the bass player will come in usually. But if each person doesn't know their parts, it's just going to take that much longer, and you're going to have to try to grind through it, and you're just going to waste time. So just get to the point where you can. And if you're a collaborative worker like I am now, Zach plays on my stuff, and we're in bands together right now, Of the Light and his own solo stuff called Zaki, right? We're helping each other out. So like, I don't really need to help Zach. I can help him live. He does it all on his own, which is amazing. So he has another perspective of that. But like, I collaborate with him because I'm not a great lead guitar player. But you know what? He won't waste my time. He's so good where I can go to a better musician than myself and say, hey, this guy's better at guitar. I want him to convey something to me on top of this riff that I'm playing that I have an idea for. He can do that. So that's another thing, putting your ego aside and letting somebody actually make your stuff better. Like, he will bring a whole new texture to what you're supposed to sound like. So, but also kind of know that before you go in too, because it's time you're spending money for. But if you can work with the right musicians, they could come in and learn something pretty freaking quick and be able to add that much more, creativeness to your awesome song and make it way better than you thought it would be in the first place. But the most important thing is know the songs before you go in. You've played them over and over. Like I'm talking like 3 to 4 months before you even start stepping in. The most important thing you want to do first is you're going to record the drums. So make sure that those freaking drums, are tuned up. You have new skins on them. Like everything needs to be. Make sure your cymbals aren't cracked if you can help it. I know how it is. And just again, guitarist, guitar strings, bass player, bass strings, and everything, and just know your shit. And I know you're gonna add.
I was gonna say Zach has experience with both being on the musician end of this and being the engineer and producer end of it. So Zach wears like 3 different hats in the studio. So I'm curious to hear your perspective of like how important studio prep is.
Definitely. I mean, first and foremost, like you said, preparation. I mean, for a band going into the studio. Now, there's, obviously. The most important thing you mentioned, in my opinion, was the metronome. Have your click tracks worked out, and everyone in the band should be practicing to a click. And it's very important that everybody's on with that, because that's just going to make everyone's life easier. Down the line, you're going to save thousands of dollars. But anyways, preparation is key. But in the case of, stuff I've done with Greg, it's interesting because a lot of, he'll have ideas and he'll portray them, and I'll think of how I can add the lead, how I can assist the chord changes and follow the rhythms he's playing as well on the drums. And so a lot of times there's a magic of improvisation involved, so
yeah.
But like Greg was mentioning, it's important to know that you can have that sort of trust in someone that's going to play that role.
The trust, it's big.
At this point, I know a bunch of other guitar players as well, some of my colleagues, that, if I hit record, that they're at a certain level of musicianship where it's, you could expect it to be perfectly in time, and you can get a whole section or a couple riffs, have them play it multiple times and just chop it up, double it, and you have a panned left and right guitar, DI signal, you want to make sure your guitar is intonated and that it's in tune, obviously, but also set up that you're using the right pickups for the right section, that the gauges of your strings are the right gauges, and just the pick you're using even will make a different sound on how the DI signal is captured. At the end of the day, people bring in amps and they want to use this and that. Be open-minded with the producer when the producer talks about reamping and different situations like that, because at the end of the day, that gives you a foolproof way to get the perfect guitar tone for the mix. So, just things like that, where when a producer recommends something, like, it's often worth listening to their word, because they're trying to help you save time. And, hopefully at least.
There's ones out there that you'll probably meet that will just be like, yeah, take your time. But you know what? If they say that, then they're probably not the best in mind for you. So somebody like him, is thinking about time and being efficient and making it sound as good as it possibly can. And if you can't do that on your own, be open to having somebody else come in and do that. Because this is a conversation, not just bands. If you're in a band, each and every one of you be prepared. But if you're working on your own, in your own budget, that's that much more important. So it's like, if you can't do it, just get somebody to do it for you. And
we all know that bands are broke. Bands, especially if you're just starting looking to record for the first time, you guys all probably work dead-end jobs. You all are...
I wouldn't say everybody works dead-end jobs, but yeah, there's a lot of dead-end jobs. There's a lot of dead-end jobs that you have to do to money do what you want to do.
Money is a very important thing with all bands, and a lot of bands just starting out don't have it collectively as a whole. Right. In studio time, if you want top-of-the-line studios, you're looking to pay at the very least $50 to $75 an hour. That's a lot of money when it adds up. So you don't want to waste your time. Yeah. You don't want to waste the studio's time. You don't want to waste your bandmates' time, because you guys know from experience, if there's a weak link in the band in the studio, it will come out very quickly, and there will be a possibility where you guys will build some resentment towards that member of the band if they're not prepared.
That will definitely be the case, and that's not That's not because like we want to have resentment. It's because it's fucking true. Just nobody could not think that. It's like the elephant in the room, and then it carries over in the writing, and then you got to solve that and talk about it, and then it's like it's bullshit. But that's as a band. Now, if you're by yourself, again, like you may be able to do this, like because you're gonna your shit. Like I ended up playing guitar because of the necessity to like convey my ideas, right? So I'm like, let me get it right, and I can convey it to somebody else, and they can add to it, or they could take it and play it better than me. I'm just gonna fucking go with it because we're gonna get shit done, and it's gonna be a type of speed that's even faster than being in a band because now I got to work with a bunch of people. So instead, I consolidated my time with working with people that will actually work with me the way I need them to work with, so we can just put all egos aside and do what's best for the actual collective, the song. Make that song as good as possible, and just be prepared with that song, because I got to go in the studio and spend that money still, but it's not spend, it's invest, because you're investing yourself. This is really important. So know what you're going to tell. I'm going to tell him so he can actually catch on fast, and we can make this process like happen. And it is a kind of magic. When you get good enough to do that, and you can record and you play out so many times, you'll have the 10,000 hours put in. You can be put on the spot and actually start coming up with stuff. And that's when you get to that level. And I'm not saying you got to get to my level. Oh, no. It's just about, that's the attitude you need to get to that level. You'll assume that you're going to be like that already. Right. So just be prepared, and then you go in. It's a great experience. And don't forget to document that experience, because you can use it as content later, right? Just make the best of each opportunity that you have, because there's so much you can do from that one opportunity. And we'll go into that on other conversations.
Let me ask you guys this, and I noticed from experience with Zach, because when I'm not a practicing musician, I've taken 3 years of guitar and piano lessons, and I don't have the knack for it. I just
you're a great engineer.
I'm a good engineer, at least. Thank you. Yes. But I'm not a practicing musician. I've tried, I just don't have it. But with my mixes, I know I've used Zach as a trusted source, and I think a lot of people don't take this into consideration that, hey, if you guys are in a band, have a friend that you trust musically with your opinion of your song. Like if you record a demo, like, hey, what do you think of this song? What do you think of the hook? What do you think of this bass line? What do you think of this drum groove?
Not the hater friend, like a friend that's actually going to tell you, like
a friend who would tell you straight to your face, hey, if this is not good or not. Because I know from years past, I've sent Zach plenty of my raw mixes, and I've asked for honest feedback of him, and he's like said, hey, this snare sounds good, but these toms can come up a little bit. What about the compression ratio of this? It sounds a little too much. Have an honest friend who would tell you straight to your face, like, hey, this can be improved, this can be improved, this is good, keep that. And I think that's important too, because I think Rick Rubin produces like that too. He produces from a listener point of view.
Yeah.
And sometimes I work with a lot of bands who want to try so hard to, like, you know, be over the top and crazy and play at like 250 BPM. I'm like, guys, the song doesn't have to be this complicated. Just make it sound as good as you can make it. Have a trusted source come in and help you, either work with you on the song, or have another friend just be like, hey, I think this sounds good. Because in the end, it's what sounds good to your listeners.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, that whole situation you're describing is just like insane. You know what I mean? To be in the producer's shoes and tell the band to like calm down. You know, like just think about that from the band's perspective for a second, and it's like, you know,
it's like babies.
Well, yeah, babies, but it's, I mean, but in a way,
like, everybody
where,
calm down now. No more monkeys jumping on the bed.
It takes some balls, like, as a producer to say to you.
But as a musician, like, be honest with yourself. Okay, be honest with yourself. Like, if a song is 250 beats per minute, can you play double bass at 250 beats per minute?
I mean, you should be able to by the time you're in the studio.
You as a drummer are trying to play 250 beats per minute, and you know, or you aren't aware of the fact that you can play 16th notes on your double bass pedal at 250 beats per minute, then you shouldn't be going into the studio.
Absolutely not.
To try to do it
and that's
250 beat per minute
on
song.
behalf of the band, you got to take the initiative to call people out on their shit if that's the truth.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are too blind to see until you really get down to the nitty gritty, and you don't want it to cost you later. It's going to cost you in the studio by not saying it. It's going to cost you in the recording studio by not saying it.
You guys make excellent points too, and it look, guys, if you're a producer, you're an engineer watching this, Zach, I'm sure you've had a lot of awkward experiences like this too. I've had plenty of experiences where I've said to bands, look, I don't think you guys have it today. Like it takes some balls to say that to a musician who's paying you to record them.
Right. Yeah.
But it's you have to be prepared to be able to take criticism. You have to be able to take honest feedback, because in the end, musicians are there to put their art onto tape. I know we're recording computers now, but hypothetically in tape. And us as engineers and producers, we're there to help get your recordings onto the radio or on Spotify. Our job is to make you translate your music into the recordings, and we want what's best for the song and for the audience. So I mean, there are some awkward conversations and difficult conversations that need to be had before
I was
going to
tell you about, just quickly, this is what unpreparedness looks like, my own personal experience. First time I ever went to a recording studio, we did pre-production, but I didn't know what a metronome was yet. I was 14, 15. So we went in, and I thought he goes, what's the BPMs? I'm like, what's that mean? I didn't even know. Dude, talking about wasting money. 8 hours it took me to not even finish basically the soul song. Like, I butchered it because I never worked with a metronome before.
And that engineer must have been smiling to the bank because, hey, you're paying him. It
ended up costing us like $3,000. I was like fucking 14. I'm an idiot. But no, as a drummer, like, you go in there, the whole band should know the BPMs. It's just the most important thing again. But like, look, I fucking wasted so much money. And when I went back in the studio again, I was prepared. I started drumming to a metronome, and I never stopped. And it's the thing you should always stick by. The importance
of it is know your tempo maps too. If you're gonna have tempo changes or key changes, bring it into the studio and have everyone uses Pro Tools, but you can convert tempo maps to basically any DAW these days. But if you have tempo maps, bring it into the studio so the engineer doesn't have to guess, hey, what bar does this change? Where you have to, I think it's bar 120 or bar 130.
You just write it down.
Timestamp
write it down.
Timestamp it,
I mean, there's so many different things. Like, obviously being prepared with BPMs is a thing. But, and another really important thing that I've run into, and I think it's like a different perspective in a sense, where if I see a band struggling with a part, and they're open to me producing them, you first you have to establish how open the band is to being produced, right? And if they are open to it, and I see them playing a lead, and I'm like, okay, let me, give you a couple suggestions, hold out this bend, or if they're playing guitar and they're not playing so well to a click track, then just make sure there's ways that you can even go about recording that, where if you have the tempo locked in, I mean, obviously, you have to have the tempo locked in, but once it's locked in, you can make sure the guitar player is holding a certain note for longer than, the next note's coming in. So you could chop it up, move it earlier, and edit it to the point where you're bringing the musical performance to life, essentially, and making sure things are in time. And we're talking about a high level of editing now, which comes from the drumming and the musician part as well. But that's, I think, where the really, like, kind of unique perspective on, instrument and engineer.
Like, sustaining a high note, like, and making that connect to the next part without having it let it die and fading out faster. Like, knowing those intricacies is all part of the pre-production process. Each person, if you're in a band or you're not in a band, should know the exact parts to make that process happen a lot more efficiently. And the more you know your stuff, the easier that will be for the engineer to make it sound that much better. And
if the producer you're going to work with or the studio you're going to work with, if they're up for it, phones these days record great audio. Yeah. So just play in your practice room, record your song as a demo on your phone, send it to your producer and be like, hey, what do you think of this? And if you're open to criticism or collaboration in that regard with a producer, your producer will, in fact, I know Zach does this all the time, like, give advice and like maybe offer some suggestions creatively to make that song the next level it could be. Yeah. And I think that's the next step is like, also you may be thinking like, I don't have somebody to actually talk to. I don't know who that would be. That's why we're here. So feel free to reach out to us and actually ask any more questions that we can help you answer to make your process easier. People that are in the local area can actually come and actually use our services, utilize it. And that's something we're developing here. That's why we actually created this channel in the first place. But most importantly, what you can get from on your own. You could do a lot on your own too. So, I mean, but it's a real big challenge in some cases when you have a job and you
want to do that, but you really don't know how to, and you just haven't got started yet, it takes a real initiative to do that. So if you really want to learn it, like I'm that guy that really didn't take the full initiative. That's why I have guys around me like Zach and Chris, yourself, that help with the technicalities that I'm not good with, that I haven't put my 10,000 hours into. Yeah, but I'm able to do it enough to get my point across where I'm prepared in the studio every single time because of the experiences that I had from the inexperiences that I had, you know?
Right. I mean, yeah, like there's musicians that have just specifically focused on the musician aspect of playing an instrument, which is respectable and incredible. You know, like those are usually incredible musicians. But, you know, from the engineer perspective, I think there's a couple things that musicians ought to know in terms of going into a studio gear-wise, because a lot of bands come into a studio and they'll see analog gear and they think it's like alien technology, like old school, whatever. A lot of people swear by digital nowadays, and that's like analog is becoming more of a lost art every day, right?
So it's like a hybrid, right?
Well, I the way, you know, I like to work is as a hybrid, we're using analog and digital, but knowing a couple different things on the analog side, like study up on compressors, like understand what a compressor does, and like just look up the different types of compressors. If you check out like a FET compressor versus a diode bridge compressor versus an optical compressor versus a, you know, a vacuum tube compression. Yeah, all of these compressors have different characteristics, right? And if you are going into a studio to get your, you know, song to sound as good as you want it to sound, you ought to know a few of these things too, you know, and it could actually go a really long way in terms of like what your end result's going to be, you know, rather than putting full trust in, you know, a mix engineer. But that's another like double-edged sword, because you don't want to oversay, you know, you have to have a trust with your mix engineer, and, you know, hopefully they know what they're talking about as well. But there's a way to bring those two worlds together, where at the end of the day, you'll achieve the result you're going for.
You bring up a very valid point, and I think, you know, a lot of bands these days, especially bands just starting out, the more seasoned bands that have more experience, like really know how to dial in their sound and know how to work in a studio. But the bands that are just starting out, they come into the studio with the impression of, hey, we have this, but the engineer can just fix it or improve it or mix it better.
Yeah.
You need to come with the attitude into the studio where, hey, our shit sounds really good right now. How can we make this stuff even better than what it already is? Like, we're happy with the way this sounds now.
Yeah.
What can you do to make it even better? Like, you need to approach the studio with that attitude.
It's crazy
because I've had a lot of drummers come in where it's like, you know, hey, my toms are literally bent out of shape and my heads don't fit properly. Hey, could we just sample these? Okay, well, why are you paying me to do it? Like, it's an insult to both your song and me as, you know, an engineer.
Yeah.
I want to be able to record your drum with your sound and your playing. I don't want to just replace it.
That's, you know, that's another topic too, because a lot of drummers are letting that happen more and more these days. And
you listen to modern rock, a lot of the snare sounds.
Well, it is a little bit. Yeah, they swear by it. It's the standard, but like the organic feel, like that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
I mean, out there, if you can actually program your drums, but there's the actual dynamics that we're talking about, depending on what kind of music you play. Anyway, if you're playing metal, it's really one velocity, right? But if you're really like have dynamics, it's important. I think drumming is the one most important thing. When I was coming up, I could never get the fucking drum sound that I wanted because I was going to the wrong people that really weren't ready to make our stuff sound like that yet. And that was a journey until like I finally met some other people like yourself. Like, you know, we have the rooms we have to do our drums and they sound fucking amazing because we put the time in, you put the time in, and I found the right people. And that's a really important thing. That's why we're here, to actually bridge that gap. So you're not like going through those landmines, you know, you can avoid those actual, that sucks, those potentials that you want to get the best recording. You got to work with, go do your research on the engineers, interview the engineers, you know, get on a FaceTime with them, or, you know, so you can actually get to know them before you even go in. And if usually you'll have somebody that will refer you to somebody. Now, if we can help you with that as well. So to the extent where we don't know where you're located, but like you can do your research and find somebody good, interview that with them yourself, take the initiative and do it, and feel comfortable as a band or as an artist that you would vibe with that person. So that's really important, and it comes down to the trust thing too. So you'll get that beforehand, so it's not awkward when you go in. It's like, I don't really like this guy.
And bands, you should ask too if you can listen to the raw tracks that the engineer put in, because
that's a great suggestion.
That's like, if you want to judge how good a raw recording is, because a raw recording, like, it's common sense, raw recording that sounds amazing is going to have an amazing mixed result.
Sure, you're not gonna.
And I've seen Zach do his thing with his drumming, with the way he mics and the way he sets up his drums to record. He barely has to do anything with the drums post in the mix.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite a YouTuber I follow, I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but he was talking about how Chris Lord Alge, the guy who produced like so many rock albums, more notably, he produced Green Day's, or recorded and mixed Green Day's American Idiot record. Mm-hmm. And he was doing a speech at, I think, a NAMM show either 2 years ago or 3 years ago at this point. And he played the raw drum recordings and the raw multi-tracks without anything on it. And it sounded almost identical to the album.
Right. Like
to where he had to do so little processing on it, where it just made that album sound that much better. So I think we're all in agreement here, where we're saying to you guys bands, make sure you guys are as sonically prepared as possible. Make sure your instruments are as good as they possibly can be, and come in with the attitude of, we want to make this sound the absolute best it can. Not, hey, we can do this and then fix it later. That attitude, your album's just, you're done before we even begin.
I think people, I totally didn't even think about that.
There's a lot of important points that both of you guys brought up. I mean, it's so important for everyone going in to record to understand the different steps in which, an engineer should follow this stuff. So it's like, pre-production is everything you do on your own to prepare to go into the studio. Yeah. And then when you go into the studio, you have the tracking phase for drums, for bass, for guitar, for vocals. Then you have the editing stage, in which the engineer goes and takes all the little extra noises out and, moves things over so that everything's perfectly in time, depending on how perfectly in time it's meant to be. And, once that's done for drums, once that's done for guitars, once that's done for bass, only then do you get to the mixing process. You want to make sure everything's played right. But if it's really properly edited, at the end of the day, that point where you're getting to the mixing process should already sound so nice and clear and crisp, and that, with the mixing, you're doing light touches, especially on the digital end, where you're, if you're using linear plugins, you could actually cause phase issues on the signal and weaken the strength of the source signal you captured. So you don't want to do stuff like that either. So imagine just straight out of the box, it sounds so, awesome, where you don't have to utilize a linear plugin like an EQ and bring up so many frequencies and, really mess up that sound source that you captured.
Guys, you both are raising some really phenomenal points here, but I think we're glossing over, or not even mentioning, one key important thing, and that's how the musicians are playing the instruments themselves. That is so important, especially for drums and analog instruments like that.
Yeah.
Something as simple as how you hit your snare drum will dramatically change how it sounds on the record. If you're playing
Dynamics.
with the
rim shot,
if you're not playing straight rim shots, your snare's not going to have that Canon sound, and you're expecting the engineer to give you the Canon snare sound. You need to be able to play your drums
That's a good point.
to where you want it to sound exactly how you want it to sound.
Yeah.
I always hit a rim shot.
Important. Yeah. Well, you're fucking, snare drum monster.
Yeah,
this guy hits snare drum harder than anyone I've heard in the studio, period. It's unbelievable.
Greg's one of those type of drummers where if he comes to the venue, I won't even mic up his snare drum for front of house. I'll be like, you're good. You're good.
But everything's like, if you're going to hit the drums hard, the rim shots, hit the rim.
Not everyone, I'm telling you, not everyone hits like that. Okay. But when you got to be aware, like, as a drummer, that sample replacement is a thing. If that's something you specifically want, then make sure you mention that to your engineer in advance, And that'll save you a ton of time because then the engineer can approach that in a completely different, manner.
But as a drummer, I've had that happen to me just because they preferred it and I was open-minded to it. But what it would have lost, and this is another topic.
You have
but
to know if they can.
They're not. Is the engineer a drummer? Does he know rhythm? Can he quantize notes correctly? Does he know a 16th from the 8th notes from the quarter notes? So that's a thing. And a lot of times that was not the case. The guy wasn't a drummer and he was doing what he thought was right. And as a drummer, I'm like, where's my ghost notes? That's not what I did. And and it just totally masked the dynamics that you can bring to your songs when you actually don't use that. Now, you can use a hybrid, you could use a sample and snare, whatever, but it depends. You just know your parts so well that when you have those grace notes, that if you don't hear that from the engineer and as a drummer, you'd be like, you're going to want to raise a question, be like, hey man, that's supposed to be there. I think don't try to mask over that.
Musician's perspective, if I was a drummer, in the studio, I think the perfect way to say that to an engineer, if you decide on using samples, and you have ghost notes and in between, dynamics you want to retain, that you want to compress the snare, and bring out the ghost notes, but on the loud hits, the main, the hit on the 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, or maybe it's a 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
You want to put a sample on, and then you'll get all the quiet hits. If just raise the awareness of the difference between the quiet hits and the loud hits. Yeah. And if the quiet hits still need it, then there's something going on the processing end, on the mixing end, where the engineer could do something to bring out those ghost notes more, or should be able to. So I think that's really the perfect way to kind of,
That's a little nugget of information for you, but because it's really important, because it's happened to me. Listen, I'm 40. I've been recording since I was 14 years old. It's probably happened 90% of the time. This last, 10 years, 5 years of my life, this is how the recordings have finally gotten better. That's how long it's taken me. So literally find the right people to work with.
I know it's pretty lame to say, but practice does make perfect.
Practice is fine, but we're learning. See, I know my shit now from a long time ago, and I'm prepared. But it's the people you work with that they may not have the equipment that they need, that they say they think they could do, but they really can't do, and that sucks. You can't tell somebody you feel bad, and you're like, this is awkward. I don't like the way this sounds. I didn't almost get signed because my record sounded so bad that the fucking label called me the next day and said, we were drunk when we were listening to it. We're like, yeah. We're all celebrating because they're going to go take it to fucking Monty Connor from Roadrunner Records. That's the fucking head guy. And they're going to sit there and listen to this shit. And they're going to decide to sign us or Mutiny Within. And, I was in a band called With Daggers Drawn. And this was a big deal. And we were recording with, whatever we were recording. We're not going to say who. This record just sounded like garbage. It just didn't sound good at all. Program drums, don't program your drums. So they couldn't get the sound they were looking for because they didn't have the right equipment. And they ended up programming the drums because they couldn't do that. And they were telling me that I wasn't hitting hard enough when I'm like, that's fucking bullshit. All right. So
you want to insult the drummer real quick? Tell him he's not hitting hard enough.
Well, I will tell a drummer. I can hit. So what are you telling me? You're recording with a 58 instead of a 57, or something like that. My bass drum, that's not probably good for that's not. You're not going to get good sound.
So
with that.
That's another important point to make, because
you just mentioned microphones in front of 2 engineers. You realize what?
Well, I know this could down a rabbit hole, but my point is this: we went, and the next day I was called and said, "Listen, we can't show this. This is going to ruin your band. They're not going to give you another chance because of this." And I didn't realize how bad this sounded. Last night we must have been fucked up so bad where we didn't realize how bad this sounded. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I was wondering the same thing why you didn't say it then. And he's like, all right, so we're gonna go with the other band. And I was like, okay, that's it. So that was what would have happened. Who knows? But it's record your shit with the right people. And the most important thing to record is really, I think, the drums, because you can do guitar in other places and lessen the expenditures there.
I've had a very similar experience before.
So passionate about it because it's wasted so much money.
Before I was operating Pro Tools and into engineering to the extent I was, I was in a band as well, and we spent thousands of dollars, went to $10 million studio, recorded with Grammy Award winning producers. Glad we're talking about this. And it turned out sounding not as expected, so it's you were saying
nicest, meanest thing I've ever heard Zach say.
Well, no. So
how
the
mean
important
can you
thing,
be while sounding the nicest?
Well, so brushing, you
can't get mad at
to
that
touch
tone.
up on Greg's subject here. He's talking about how work with the right people.
Yeah,
we were working with Grammy award-winning producers, and oftentimes people are given a label, or
and they take it and they use it for everything.
It's important very, very important point brought up. It's so important to know that you're working with the right people, in a sense that you know what they're capable of, not that they have clout or they're a Grammy award-winning producer.
That's where it gets fogged out, because they'll use
There's a big thing between producers, and I'm sure you've heard this, that an artist that's going to work with someone in the studio for the clout is not going there for the right reason.
No.
Yeah,
and that is such a big thing to understand from a band perspective, right? So get that out of your head right now. And for
sure,
just know that you're looking for someone that can engineer drums. You're looking for someone that can engineer edit drums, engineer and edit guitars, and get everything tracked the way you do. If you need help in your tracking process, if your engineer can handle that, great. You're good. But not every engineer is going to be able to handle that. Not
some will do that or at other things.
No. There's you have engineers that aren't musicians, and I don't mean this in a bad way or anything. But
Chris.
No. Incredible engineers. There's absolutely mind-blowing engineers that are fantastical engineers, because they have a different perspective on it, and they understand how to feel the music in different ways, and that's incredible. There's a magic and art to that kind of ties into. It's almost like improvising on instruments.
But you're doing it with recording.
Right. It's just how you're hearing things, how you utilize the technology, and the actual physics behind the engineering, and tying it into music.
Mm-hmm.
So just be aware, like I mentioned earlier, with the tracking process, and then the editing process for every instrument, and then the mixing process, and after the mix there's the mastering process. Can your engineer handle the mastering process, or do you want to send it off to a mastering engineer?
That's a good topic, because your mix should be so good where the mastering isn't going to change it completely. But if that guy can't make those,
you're 100% right, and it goes back to where you first started. Like, the raw recordings have to sound so good. You need to think to yourselves, do we really need to mix this? Like, do we just need to adjust a couple faders, and in presto, there's our song?
Yeah.
This can be slightly improved. Okay, does this mix sound so good? Like you just said, Greg. Does this mix sound so good? Do we really need it mastered?
Well, no. Yes, but no.
Yes,
you do need it mastered.
You do need it mastered,
but it should not. You should the guy who's mastering it. It shouldn't have to do that much to it to make it sound the way it sounds.
Right.
Because you mixed it so well, the intricacies are there, the frequencies are lined up.
No, at the end of the day,
very well. What he said.
Your final mix before it's mastered should sound excellent.
Yes,
and it should have dynamics in it. You should feel the pump from it. But the master is going to bring it to that standard level. And you can even have a different master for Spotify. There's different average volumes that sound optimal on different streaming platforms.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Because those platforms will compress the audio, and if you have it at a certain volume that's above that, and it compresses the audio, then you're ruining the quality of how your audio is sounding on that streaming platform.
I think Spotify is like mastering at 14 LUFS. I could be wrong on this,
but I think 11 or 12,
like
negative 12.
But
it's definitely lower,
somewhere right around there, and I think CDs are like 9. I think.
Yeah.
So like
magic number.
If whoever's mastering your records or mastering your single, just get different versions, because when I send out masters, I send one for streaming, and I clearly label it for streaming.
Get different
and I
versions,
one
but
for
be aware
CD.
of the fact that you're trying to get your record mastered for a specific purpose. Don't forget about that purpose. Forget about the clout, and think about what you want, where you're going to be playing your music, like where. Obviously you want it on
probably
Spotify.
The internet.
So ask for that from your mastering engineer. Ask for that from the engineer who's doing the mastering, So these are all important little pieces of information to know from the band perspective, so that you're going in so prepared that you undeniably just get through the process.
You optimize your time.
Right. You have the right people put in place in order to get the right jobs done.
And that's what I'm trying to say. Like, let's streamline your path to success, because Fuck, man, I've been through the fucking mill, and it sucks. And I know what it's like. Even though you can do a lot on your own now, it's if you want it to sound really good, like, you know, just fucking, you got to do the research. You got to do the interview. You can't just go in thinking you're gonna work with somebody and not know.
And I think that's a great segue to lead into the final like piece of advice. I think we're starting to build a theme here with this, where we give like the final word of the episode.
Band name patterns.
Yeah.
So between the three of us, guys, we have a great dynamic here. Greg is more of a traditional musician, more than engineer. Zach is a hybrid of both musician and engineer producer, and I'm more of an engineer than musician. So I think between the three of us, we have three really like different but still creative perspectives when it comes to this whole thing. So I want to end on this, guys, since we're basically like starting to develop a format here where we give a final word that you would want to say to a band. If a band watching this right now wants to start recording to the studio for the very first time, they've never experienced this before, or they may have done it once or twice, like produced their own demos.
Yeah.
What key pieces of advice would you give this band starting out to get themselves as mentally and physically prepared to be in the studio?
Top 3.
Yeah,
So
top three. Top 3 pieces of advice.
Yeah. Know the parts. Just know your parts. That's it. Know your other musicians in the band, the other bandmates, know their parts, and make sure you call each other out on if something doesn't sound right. One person or more than one person may know. It's very imperative that you know that, because when you get in the studio, you're gonna really find out fast that you're gonna fucking just hold the whole process up if you don't do that. So you're doing yourself a favor, and you gotta really be able to talk to your bandmates like that. Don't be a douche about it. Just be like, yo, dude, I don't think that's right. You know, be like, yo, you fucking don't have that right. Give it to me. I'm going to play it.
The bass player thinks he's doing good.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want that. You don't want that attitude.
But it's so important. Second thing is have your equipment just ready to go. As a drummer, you know, guitar player, bass player, you should have your strings changed, a little worn in a little bit. And know if you know what it's going to sound like, if you're going to be playing with a pick or not on a bass, you know, if you're playing with your fingers, because it might sound completely different. I don't know.
Absolutely.
You know, so yeah. And then just have the drum heads changed and the snares, make sure they're all good and just tuned up, you know, make sure that's good, because then you don't want to waste time, right? So you get in, you know what the hell's going on. And then 3 would be get sleep before the night before, because you're going to make like probably do 8 takes, and
drummers especially.
Yeah, as a drummer, yeah, it's very physical and demanding. You're going to play for way longer than you've ever played, so just be prepared to do that. And that's why the pre-production is so fucking important.
Yeah, I mean, first time going in the studio, you know, make sure drummer figure out those BPMs, have those clicks worked out, so you know your parts. You know, you go in, you just play it exactly how you've been playing it to a metronome. You could download an app on your phone, metronome app.
Yeah,
there's hundreds of them at this point. You just
metronome.
Get one and you just play to it. That's it. You figure out what feels right. Play it with the band. Put some headphones on. Figure that out. And then as far as guitar players, yes, recording yourself is good. I think the best option, it behooves you as a modern guitar player to not get a little Scarlett interface, and get a DAW on your computer and start tracking yourself. Practice to a click. You know, you see your waves physically showing up, and like you could see your transients and see where it's on. Track DI signals, -6 to -8 decibels. You can record those DI signals yourselves and bring that into your recording session. There's your scratch tracks. Not only your scratch tracks, if you record and edit your DI signals, you could just bring that into the session, and you don't even have to record guitars. You just be like, I just want to reamp these tones. Whatever studio amps there are, they can use.
That's how important it is.
Run those DIs
to get the DI signal. You always say that.
Now, this is typically not something that a band doing a recording for the first time knows about or goes in prepared with, but you know, for people watching this podcast, it is absolutely that involved, and there's so many steps to this where it's worth really checking out the things we have to say with experience to not waste thousands of dollars like Greg was mentioning earlier.
Yeah. I think the thing of taking the initiative and recording yourself is something that I did too late in my life. I should have done it way earlier. And that's what you did too. Like, you're like, you love doing it, right? So it's like one of your passions.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
like me knowing
life.
about, like, looking at the dynamics of how you're playing, you could tell as a guitar player, because if you're recording guitar, it's very delicate. You know, you can overplay something and make it sound like crap really quickly. So to know those intricacies, have that down. You know, already have that predetermined.
The important things, like definitely for guitar, you know, for drummers, you play into a click. Guitar, if you can track your DIs -6 to -8 decibels and have those ready for a producer, that's incredible. You won't even have to track guitars in the studio, and you can take your time to track them at home. Get it perfect.
It's a way to save money.
But also, I mentioned earlier, like the different steps to recording. You have the tracking process and the editing process, then the mixing process, then the mastering process. On the tracking process, you know, you got to think about how every instrument's being tracked. If you're tracking DIs for guitars and drums, or no, guitars and bass, then think about on a drum kit, you're putting up maybe 10 mics, maybe 15 mics. You got to make sure that the room you're recording your drums in are the right room for drums, and you know that the person recording drums really knows how to handle recording drums, and just make sure the drummer is locked in with that click, knows the BPM. As long as you have that down and you're working with the right people, you should have way more of an edge than if you go in unprepared with those two simple things. And vocals, you know, vocalists should maybe even do a little research on what type of vocal mics he likes, what type of sound he's going for. Have references ready, you know, like before you even start recording, sit down with your producer, get to know them a little bit, and like engineer, and give them some references. Be like, this is the sound we're going for. You might play something with a more snappy snare, and the producer will then think like, okay, to get that snare sound, I'm going to place the overhead mics higher now to give it the appearance of the snare being further away. Because you gave that reference, you know, like, so there's different things. Whereas if you're like doing death metal and you want to be closer, bring the overheads down to get more cymbal definition and achieve that with less compression. So there's like so many little specific things. Just, you gotta, you know, communicate with your producer, be open to them, think of them as a band member, you know, like, and make sure you're prepared on the different aspects you need to be, to go in and track everything properly so that the editing process is easier and done perfectly, so that the mixing process just sounds great, you know, from the get-go, and then so that it just feeds itself into the mastering process.
It's all from the source.
All from the source.
If you're going from the source correctly, you put in the time doing it, you're putting in the practice, you're knowing your parts, your colleagues in the band's parts so well. When you record it, it's going to be that much easier to produce and to create an awesome sound, because you've already done that from the source, from the spot that you're actually playing. So if they could capture all those dynamics, it's going to turn out to be amazing. And that's from all the hard work that you put in and all the foresight you had beforehand. So you're not, you know, saying hindsight's 20/20 later on.
I mean, both my colleagues here gave incredible points, and I'll try to add a little bit here and there to not repeat the same things you said.
Happy little tree.
Happy little tree, little salt.
Look at that guy.
George Martin is considered the fifth Beatle because of how he produced those records. Like, regardless of whether you think the Beatles are, you know, the greatest thing ever, or overrated. I know that's a hot debate with music people.
They're undeniably one of the best bands.
One thing that is completely undeniable about the Beatles is how they and George Martin produced those records and how they changed the game for everybody. Yeah. And that's just further proof that a good producer will make bands that much greater.
But these days, you know, you're working with an engineer basically who's more of a producer or more of an engineer. So again, know who you're going to work with before you go in and work with them, so you can get the best out of the situation. So that leads me to my biggest piece of advice. If you would the easiest way to shop around for an engineer, listen to their work. Say, hey, we are a band with, like if you're a symphonic metal band, if you're a Nightwish type of band, and you have a lot of backing tracks, a lot of chorus, like orchestra elements, ask if the engineer you want to work with has any experience with this, or ask if they have anything with a lot of backing tracks, a lot of, you know, percussive elements like that.
listen to what they work with, and if they have the option, ask for like a 30-second clip of like the raw tracks, because the raw tracks, if you listen to good raw tracks, you can tell how good an engineer is just based on the raw tracks.
Yeah,
definitely.
Whether how much the term polishing the turds
also,
are.
like, it's very easy to confuse engineer and producer, and
an engineer,
understand, like I was saying, like the different steps before, the tracking process, the editing process, mixing, and be aware of the fact that the person engineering and operating Pro Tools and that understands compressors and EQs and how to mix might not be the guy editing your music, right? So like, be aware of that and know that if you need someone for drum editing, a trusted source, that's something you're looking for before you just show up at a recording studio and hope for the best, because
you'll be real surprised later.
Which leads me to number 2 pieces of advice I have. Leave your egos at the door. If you are, if you're playing a couple of gigs and you got the girls going, yay, look at you playing your guitar solo, cool. Trust me when I say this, you will be quickly humbled in the studio if you are coming in thinking your shit doesn't stink. Your shit stinks like everyone else's. Like, there are times with how experienced Greg and Zach are, I guarantee it, there have been times where they've come to the studio and they listen to their performances and like, oh, I definitely was not on the mark today.
I can tell you right now,
sometimes
2012, 2012, I won't go in to do recording, and I drank the night before. I stayed up too late. I was just unprepared. But I was prepared with the songs. Like, I knew them. I just didn't get the sleep that I was telling you that's so important before you go in. And I don't know. I was struggling through it, and just fucking take care of yourself before you go in. Like, really, like, I had put in the time, put in the work, but that one night of drinking, shouldn't have done it right before, should have done it after. That ended up like making me take a lot longer than it should have.
And you guys all mentioned making sure your instruments are all clean and prepared.
Yeah.
The most
broken
important,
cymbals, fucking
more
drum
importantly,
heads.
The instruments need to be played by musicians. So take care of yourself before you go in. If you are going to be out partying the night before, don't go out partying the night before you go into the studio. Get yourself a good night's sleep. Don't drink. Don't do any herbal influences. Don't do any of that. Don't go skiing on some mountains of powder. Don't do anything like that.
Yeah, just the hard stuff.
Just the hard stuff.
So, Greg had mentioned earlier, like, you're going to be playing drums all day. You're playing a song 8 times, and then you have an album. Imagine playing 80 songs in a day, right? Whatever. For some, sometimes it is like that. But as a drummer, just imagine you're a metal drummer, first time going in the studio, you've never done this before, and you're not prepared for that. Take care of yourself is one thing, but make sure you're like physically ready for that. Yeah. I remember even younger, I was ready with the songs 100% and did 10 songs the first day and another 1 song the second day. First time recording drums and we're talking 5-6 takes each song of a lot of double bass and a lot of complicated stuff, and making sure I got every part down, and all those drums were tracked. But I remember the night of, after the first night, I just had full body cramps, man. I couldn't move. I felt, and after this period, I started actually running, 3 miles a day, which 12 laps on, on a track or whatever, run 2 laps, rest, and then rest one, just walk 1 lap, run 2 laps, walk 1 lap. It gets done pretty quick. I did this for a few months to prepare myself as a drummer going into a studio. Not even going into a studio. But what I noticed was, no. In doing that,
your stamina must have been
the aerobic exercise with double bass, I felt like I could do singles at a higher BPM without getting tired and for longer periods of time, which essentially led to more development in the musicianship side, and all stuff that led to being more experienced and physically prepared to be in the studio.
It is physically. It really is physically demanding. It sure is, and
that's just drums,
that's just drums. I think everything is physically demanding in certain genres of music. But remember, the way you play it live is going to not necessarily be the way you're going to record it. It's going to be a different feel. So just be prepared, because if you do that pre-production, you're going to be prepared on a practice level for the recording studio, and then when you play live, you can be excited and everything, but you'll be that much better on both ends, because recording drums and playing drums live is completely different, and playing any instrument live is different than recording it. So just be prepared on both levels.
Well, on that note, guys, really awesome conversation here, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
No problem, guy.
Not your guy, friend.
Guys, if you are watching this and you like what you see, please hit that like button, hit subscribe, and consider subscribing to the podcast, available everywhere you get your podcasting. We'll see you in the next episode, guys. Take care.
Peace.
Peace.